Good morning. Dr. R. Michael Fisher here, fearologist. Study of the fear and fearlessness relationship has been my expertise for the last 31 years plus. And I'm still excited about the topic. I'm still excited about what makes a good fear education in our world. I'm pretty totally convinced that we do not get the kind of education that we need. And I'm talking day one to death and beyond. If such a thing exists, we are not getting the education on the best ways and knowledge of and approaches to how to travel the path of fearlessness, which means traveling in the world with all the fear, anxiety, dread, depression, stuff we call mental health, never mind the actual physical health deterioration and symptoms that go with those conditions of chronic distress. Okay, this is a video series. I'm starting today because I have to be blunt. Not in desperation, but certainly with a sense of urgency. But I think more than that, just a sense of intelligence. The time is now. I'm speaking for me. I think it's now also, however, for people who communicate with me. Because I've been teaching fearlessness for all these decades, and both as a researcher, scholar, and as a clinician, therapist type myself, I do all kinds of work, and I'm very familiar with the world of people's healing processes, transformation processes, spiritual emergencies, spiritual enlightenment. That doesn't mean I'm an expert on everything and how people grow, change, drop down into disease and dis-ease, but I know a lot, and I'm just basically coming out to say, here we are, 2021, US presidential inauguration with a new potential government, but a world, and I can feel it here in Canada, America is in just a horrible mess. That doesn't mean it's all a mess, and Canada is in a mess. Doesn't mean it's all a mess, but I'm getting emails from people around the world, in America, in Europe, and other places. In my connection circle, they've followed the fearlessness teachings a bit, that I've done off and on, but they're expressing to me, especially males, that they have high anxiety these days. They feel dysfunctional to the point of panic attacks, deep depression, limiting their ability to think well, live well, and carry on in the world the way they would like to, in an empowered way. So all of that is what's pushing me to do this video series. I'm going to keep these quite short, and the focus for today, as I start this series off on really a good fear education from a fearlessness paradigm, that's my approach. I have to make a distinction right away, as you and I, if you follow these and you want to stay with me on this learning journey through this series, you can communicate in the comment box, you can email me directly. I will try to answer every question for sure, and just elaborate comments you make, and give my own views and experiences. I'm going to help you as best I can from what I know through using the fearlessness paradigm to work with all of those issues I just mentioned. And the top three are anxiety, I'm being told about, depression, which often goes with anxiety, and panic attacks that go with both of those. And that's just the surface, but that is what people recognize. So I'm kind of really interested in an entirely new take on, let's just call it, on anxiety, disorders, dis-ease, sickness, soul sickness. Let's go to the distinction and the lesson for today. Very briefly. You're not alone. I feel the wobbliness myself of these times. When I think about the future, I think about my future, I think about what's happening in the world and the catastrophes, the collapse. I've done several videos on that. You can check on my new YouTube channel if you wish. But bottom line is we have to do the practices to deal with it. So here's the two concepts. Um, this you'll be familiar with. In the ordinary paradigm, not necessarily fearlessness paradigm, but the ordinary paradigm of what I call really the fear paradigm of how the biomedical, clinical, psychological model works in treatment of body, mind, soul, spirit, dis-ease. Says therapy is the term that's often used. I need to find therapy. So some of these people are telling me on my network, yeah, I'm seeking treatment. And pretty much all the time I know they're seeking treatment within the clinical fear-based model. Is that bad? No, that's not bad. Is that the best? No, it's not the best. Is it useful? It can be. So those are a few of my frequently asked questions and my answers. Being blunt, simple. I don't want to be demeaning at all in the way I answered those, but I am being blunt. Therapy is not the answer to all problems. And that means therapy as it's constructed usually and typically, not always, but typically within that biomedical, clinical, psychological paradigm. Dealing with the individual, that's how that therapy works. Oh, what's your problem? See, right? Therapy immediately starts focusing in on you, your symptoms. And sure, it will eventually try to expand that understanding of your problems, as any good therapist would, of all kinds of therapies, to a little bit larger context. Well, what's your relationships like with people? What's your family history background? But therapy typically does not go very far in those directions because the therapy is still about you. You are the client. You're trying to get help. They're supposed to sell you, usually, that help. I see that as a major problem in itself, that whole construction of therapy. So that we keep in mind as we enter this first lesson. And I would basically say therapy is not the answer to the problems, which end up being your problems and our problems. So notice the problem ends up being my problem, right? The I perspective, and it ends up being our problem, the we perspective. So that's what therapy focuses on typically and mostly is the I problem, the individualism approach. I think that is part of the sickness of our entire societies that are individualistic. It is not the only reason that I think they are sick. They are sick for many, many reasons for the conversation. But for now, let's make the distinction with the other term. Right? What is Therapia? It's not my own word. It's obviously a derivative or it is actually more the origin, probably Greek or Latin here, of where therapy came from. Therapy in the more ancient holistic tradition of understanding, and it's a philosophical tradition that I rely on particularly for a fearlessness paradigm. Yeah, philosophical. Because it's a philosophy is a love of wisdom, a love of the knowledge of wisdom. So Therapia approaches our distress, diseases, it includes the therapy realm of understanding and treatments and interventions, But the philosophical intervention itself is a treatment, is a prescription. That's why philosophy evolved. It evolved way thousands of years before psychology and medicine in the traditional scientific model, the Western Enlightenment model of medicine. And I'm talking about philosophy that goes way back before Enlightenment, European philosophy in the 1700s. I'm talking about philosophy that goes back to the origins of knowledge, knowing, understanding. And I put those in a particular sequence: knowledge, knowing, and understanding. Knowledge is easier to get, knowing's harder to get, understanding is even harder to get. Two, and integrate that in your body, mind, soul, spirit diseases, which are inevitable, part of life. And certainly in these times of the 21st century, we are getting immense invasions of distress, disease, chronic anxiety, right? Depression, panic attacks of various kinds, which can come in all kinds of forms, including terrorist acts, are a type of panic attack. They're a blowing out, right? A bullying out of massive anxiety put into the form of aggression. Therapy is really the treatment that starts in this larger perspective. That's really the it perspective. What's going on? What is it? The world is an it, a living it perspective. But it's a much larger world of going out of its own balance, going out of its regulation to dysregulating. It's an ecological system, right? So this is a holistic, integral ecological system I'm talking about. That's where therapy starts. We have to have knowledge of that. And then in that knowledge of the whole systems is where I bring in the fearlessness intervention. The fearlessness paradigm comes in at that holistic, integral perspective, right into the it perspective, and says, how is fear and fearlessness playing out in the world right now? Well, who's teaching us about that? Fearlessness? It's not how we think about fear management very often. I'm not saying there isn't people writing about and thinking about fearlessness out there, and there certainly are traditions of fearlessness that go way back in philosophy, especially in the East. But generally, we do not think about this juxtaposition of what happens when fear meets fearlessness. What is a fearlessness intervention? And I'm saying, well, fearlessness intervention is kind of like an arrow being shot into the problem of fear, the fear problem on the global, some call it cosmic perspective, the it perspective. Because I'm part of that it. I need to understand that. When I understand that, then I can focus on how I am involved in that, and then how we, whether it's my intimate partner, whether it's my daughter, whether it's my grandchild, whether it's the community I live in immediately, whether it's then the society, right, and then the nation, and the we as far out as you want to go. And I'm only talking here about the visible world. A fearlessness paradigm says, well, just because it's the visible world of regular time, space, dimensions, doesn't mean that that's the only dimensions, the visible. And that's part of the fearlessness intervention, is also looking at the invisible forces, beings, other beings than human, nature, the cosmos dynamics, ecological wisdom, traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous perspective. So that's what you see fearlessness teaching, fearlessness approach to Therapia is philosophical in that sense. So I think if you gather just what I have been framing and reframing here, that is a philosophic approach. That is the movement toward a Therapia of healing, of recovery and transformation for us. When I say us, I really mean that includes the it, the I, and the we perspectives coming together in a triangulation, an integral wholeness. That's where we start. As far as I'm concerned, that is not where therapy starts. And that's why I've said therapy will not solve these problems in our world that we're each linked to so intimately. And we feel the disease and the distress. If you're living and sensitive at all, you will feel it. If you're completely numbed out, you are feeling it, but you don't. Your body, brain, mind has shut down enough to numb itself from feeling it, that participation of what you are in this great system going on. And that participation has its joyful, wonderful side and beauty, and it has its depressing, anxious, terrifying, panic side as well. We're going to be riding that in the lessons ahead, riding that wild horse, if you will, of this phenomenon going on today, politically, economically, ecologically, and all the great challenges we have to solve these problems. We can survive and do it well, or we can survive and cling on and hide in our isolated dens. The people who are expressing emails, their struggles right now, typical. They're isolating, they're hiding, not talking or writing, communicating, and they're forgetting about the difference between therapy and therapy, or they never knew in the first place. Not their fault. Even when you forget, that happens because we have denial mechanisms when we're trying to hang on and we're so feeling so much pain and suffering and struggle, even giving up, wanting to not live in this kind of world, or what seems to be coming as this kind of world. The future doesn't look good. So I'm not denying any of those things, and I'm not, getting super depressed about them myself, but I can certainly feel the wobbliness of my own being struggling, my own soul, if you will, even my mind slipping, my emotional life slipping and sliding. Gotta learn to skate differently, we dance differently in the kind of world we have. So it's not, we've not been prepared. Our fear education is crap. Sorry, it is. So hopefully I haven't been sounding too arrogant today or too ignorant today of reality. I am an idealist, realist type of thinker, but this is what the path now will be taking in these lessons on therapy is. Look forward to the next session with you, and yeah, really look forward to your comments, questions, and let's keep the education process going. Okay, it's all about learning the fearlessness paradigm.